The lawyer's voice cracked on the fourth sentence, and that's how I knew, before I understood, my name was gone from my father's will. Not the house, not the diner. Not $1 of the account my father and I had built together since I was 23 years old, wiping down counters after school, learning to flip eggs before I learned to drive. Gone, every bit of it, signed over to my sister, and my sister alone. He kept talking, something about the most recent version, and properly witnessed, and your father's wishes. I stopped hearing words. I heard my own pulse instead, and underneath it, one sentence, looping on repeat. He wouldn't do this to me. Someone did this to him. My sister sat 2 chairs down, staring at her hands like she'd never seen them before. When I finally looked at her, really looked, she wasn't surprised. She was scared. Here's the thing nobody tells you about losing a parent. The grief isn't what breaks you first. It's the 100 small betrayals hiding behind it, the ones you don't spot until it's already too late to stop them. But that wasn't even the worst part. My name is Elena Cross. For most of my life, my family was 3 things. My dad, Sam, my older sister, Denise, and a 24-hour diner on Route 9 with our last name on the sign in chipped gold paint. Dad bought the diner the year I was born, back when it was a boarded-up gas station with a busted grill. He and my mother, Margaret, worked it together until she left, when I was 9, not dramatically, just quietly, the way some marriages end, moving 2 states away and calling on birthdays. Dad never badmouthed her. He just worked harder. Denise is 6 years older than me. She practically raised me in that diner's back booth, doing my math homework between orders, sneaking me pie when Dad wasn't looking. When I got married to Marcus, Denise walked me down the aisle because Dad's hip had given out that year, and he couldn't stand for that long. She held my arm the whole way and whispered, "Don't cry. You'll ruin your mascara and blame me." That was Denise. Sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal, the kind of person who'd insult you and defend you in the same sentence, sometimes to the same person. We ran the diner together. As adults, Denise handled the books, I handled the front of house, and Dad, even past 70, still came in 3 mornings a week to make his famous biscuits. Because he said, a diner without the owner's hands in the flour wasn't really his diner anymore. I thought nothing could touch us. 3 cross women, well, 2 cross women and the man who'd made us one, held together by flour dust, chipped coffee mugs, and 40 years of regulars who knew our names better than most of our relatives did. Then, on a Tuesday in March, Dad collapsed behind the register. Stroke, severe, the kind the doctors describe in a tone that makes you sit down before they finish the sentence. He lived 9 more weeks. And somewhere in those 9 weeks, everything I thought I knew about my family quietly came apart. I just didn't know it yet. The first 3 weeks after the stroke, Denise and I took turns at the hospital like it was a shift schedule, because in a way, it was. We'd swap at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., texting updates, holding hands in hallways, crying in the same stairwell more times than I can count. Then, in week 4, Denise started going alone. She said it was easier, less overwhelming for Dad to have 1 visitor instead of 2 rotating in and out. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She'd never lied to me before. Not about anything that mattered. But small things started to feel wrong. I noticed Dad's phone, which used to sit charging on his nightstand, was gone from his hospital room. When I asked, Denise said she'd taken it home to keep it safe. I noticed a man I didn't recognize leaving Dad's room one afternoon as I arrived mid-40s, expensive coat, the kind of posture that comes from a job that pays well. Denise brushed it off. Financial advisor. Dad wanted to get his affairs in order. I should have asked more questions right then. I didn't. I noticed the diner's schedule changed without me. Denise started closing up alone on nights that used to be mine, telling me to rest. I've got this. I noticed she stopped bringing her laptop to the hospital, where she used to do the books between visits, and instead brought a slim leather folder she kept angled away from me. None of it was proof of anything. Each piece, alone, was nothing. A closed folder, a stranger in a hallway, a schedule swap. But grief has its own kind of math. It makes you round every strange thing down to nothing, because doing the opposite, adding it all up, means admitting you might be about to lose 2 people instead of 1. I remember calling Marcus, my husband, from the hospital parking lot one night and saying, almost laughing at myself, "Is it insane that I feel like Denise is hiding something from me? About Dad?" He didn't laugh back. "You've known her your whole life," he said. "If your gut is saying something, it's probably not nothing." I told him he was overthinking it. I was the one overthinking it, actually. I just didn't know that yet, either. Then I noticed something impossible. Dad's signature on a hospital consent form Denise had brought in for him to sign didn't look like his handwriting. I didn't say anything about the signature. Not right away. I told myself I was being paranoid, that a man recovering from a stroke with a weakened right hand was allowed to write his name a little differently than he used to. But once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing everything. 2 weeks before Dad passed, I stopped by the diner on a morning I wasn't scheduled, just to check the walk-in freezer that had been acting up. The new lock on the office door stopped me cold. A new lock. On the office Denise and I had shared for a decade. When I called her, she answered fast, almost too fast, like she'd been waiting for the phone to ring. "I changed the locks because of the break-in scare on Route 9, she said. "I meant to tell you. There's a spare key rack for a reason, Denise. I couldn't get into my own office. I'll get you a new key." "When?" Silence on the line. "Then, Elena, I don't have time for this right now. Dad needs me." That line, "Dad needs me," became her answer to everything. Why she was handling paperwork alone. Why the man in the expensive coat kept showing up. Why she'd stopped looping me into decisions we used to make together, down to the smallest things, like which supplier to use for coffee filters. Our mother, Margaret, came back into the picture around then, too, flying in from out of state once she heard how sick Dad had gotten, despite the divorce, despite everything. And almost immediately, she took Denise's side in every small disagreement, which stung more than I expected. "Denise is handling so much," Margaret would say. "Let her handle it." I started to feel like an extra in a story where I used to have a lead role. The final straw, before everything broke wide open, happened 9 days before Dad died. I drove to the hospital and found Denise in the hallway, arguing in a hushed, furious voice with the man in the expensive coat. I only caught the tail end. "Before she finds out," he was saying. Denise saw me and went pale. The man, I'd later learn his name, was Victor Doyle, smiled at me like we were old friends, and introduced himself as a family consultant helping streamline the estate. I asked Denise, right there in the hallway, what exactly needed to be streamlined before I found out. She didn't answer. She just said, "Please trust me," and walked back into Dad's room without me. I wish I had followed her in and demanded the truth right then. I didn't. And 3 days later, my father was gone. The will reading was 2 weeks after the funeral. I told you how that went, my name gone, everything to Denise. a document dated 3 weeks before Dad died, apparently signed and witnessed in a lawyer's office I'd never heard of, by a lawyer none of us had ever met. I didn't cry in that room. I went numb instead, numb enough to do something Denise never expected. I hired my own attorney the next morning, a woman named Priya Anand, who specialized in contested estates, and I asked her one question. Can you tell if a will is fake? She told me it was harder than movies make it look, but not impossible. Handwriting analysis. Witness verification. Bank records around the date of signing. I gave her everything I had, which at the time felt like almost nothing. It took her 12 days to call me back. Elena, she said, I need you to sit down. The 2 witnesses listed on the new will didn't exist, not as licensed notaries, not anywhere in the state database. The signature, the one that had bothered me in that hospital room, didn't match a single sample of your father's handwriting from the last 30 years, including samples from before his stroke. And the man who'd notarized it, Victor Doyle, wasn't a lawyer or a financial consultant at all. He was under investigation in 2 other states for elder financial fraud. I confronted Denise that same night, in the diner, after close. Both of us standing in the kitchen where we'd made 10,000 breakfasts together. I expected her to defend herself. I expected excuses. Instead, she sat down on an overturned milk crate and put her face in her hands and said something I never saw coming. He's our brother, Elena. I thought I'd misheard her. She said it again, quieter. Victor, he's Dad's son. From an affair? Before you were born, before Mom even. Dad found out 4 years ago that Victor had tracked him down, and Dad panicked and paid him to stay away and never tell you or Mom. I only found out about him this year, when Victor showed up at the hospital and threatened to tell everyone unless Dad rewrote the will to include him. I didn't know he was forging things behind my back, I swear to you, Elena. I thought I was protecting Dad's secret, not signing away your inheritance. I want to tell you I believed her instantly. I didn't. Not that night. But I did order a DNA test, the next morning one for Victor, using a coffee cup he'd left behind in our office the last time he'd come checking on the estate, and one for myself. The results came back 9 days later. Victor Doyle was, in fact, my father's biological son, and he'd been playing a longer game than any of us realized. Buried in the diner's own supplier invoices, Priya found something that turned my stomach. 8 months before Dad's stroke, a new coffee distributor had started delivering to us every single Tuesday morning, signing for it as V. Doyle, I'd shaken that man's hand a dozen times across our own counter. I'd complimented his delivery schedule. I had, according to my own handwriting in the tip jar log, given him a free slice of pie on what he'd told me was his birthday. He hadn't found us in a hospital hallway. He'd been standing across our counter for the better part of a year, learning our locks, our habits, our signatures, waiting for an opening he could walk straight through. I wish I could say the truth fixed everything instantly. It didn't. It broke something new before it fixed anything old. Our mother, Margaret, learned about Dad's affair and the secret son in the same 5-minute phone call, and I watched 30 years of quiet, unspoken questions about her own marriage finally get answered in the one way she'd never wanted them answered. Denise and I didn't speak for 6 days. I was furious that she'd kept a secret this size from me, even with good intentions. She was furious that I doubted her, instead of trusting that she'd never hurt me on purpose. We said things in that kitchen that night that we're both still sorry for. You let me think you'd betrayed me, I told her, for weeks. You let me feel like I was losing my sister and my father in the same summer. I was trying to protect you from finding out Dad wasn't who you thought he was, she said. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I just didn't know how to protect everyone at once. Marcus, my husband, sat with me those 6 days and didn't try to tell me how to feel. He just kept saying one thing. Whatever you decide about Denise, decide it because it's true, not because you're still angry. I thought about that a lot. I thought about the two of us as kids in that back booth, about the wedding aisle, about every 8 a.m. shift swap in that hospital hallway when she was carrying more than she ever let me see. And I thought about Victor, a man who'd spent 4 years being paid to disappear, and instead of ever approaching me, his actual half-sister honestly chose to forge documents and manipulate a dying man's family instead. Whatever pain he carried, he'd turned it into something that hurt the people who had nothing to do with the decision that hurt him. On the 7th day, Denise showed up at my house with the leather folder, the one I used to see her hiding at the hospital. Inside were bank statements. She'd been quietly paying down Dad's medical debt out of her own savings for weeks. The debt Victor had threatened to expose to force Dad's hand, trying to make the whole problem disappear before I ever had to know it existed. She hadn't been protecting herself. She'd been trying, badly, to protect all of us. I still regret how long it took me to ask her why, instead of assuming the worst. Priya, my attorney, filed to contest the will within the week, backed by the forged signature analysis, the fake witnesses, and Victor's documented fraud history in 2 other states. But before the court date, Victor made one more move. He came to the diner. It was a Thursday morning, breakfast rush, the diner full of regulars who'd known our family for decades. Victor walked in wearing that same expensive coat, sat down at the counter like a customer, and asked, loud enough for half the room to hear, whether Denise and I had thought more about being reasonable. Denise came out from behind the counter first. I'll never forget her voice. You have a copy of every fraud complaint filed against you sitting in a courthouse 2 counties over, she said. You forged our father's signature while he was dying in a hospital bed. And you walked in here, into his diner, to ask us to be reasonable? The room had gone silent. Every regular, every server, every cook, watching, I stepped up beside her. You're our brother, I said. You could have knocked on my door 4 years ago and just told me the truth. I would have wanted to know you. Instead, you chose this. Victor's expression flickered just for a second, something almost like regret before it hardened back into the calm, practiced smile he'd worn in every hospital hallway. You gave me a free slice of pie once, he said, quietly, like it still meant something to him, or like he needed us to believe it did. For a birthday, that wasn't even real. Then, louder, to the whole room, the will stands until a judge says otherwise. And he left. He wasn't wrong about needing a judge. But he underestimated how much evidence 2 determined sisters and 1 very good attorney could assemble in 6 weeks. The hearing lasted less than a day. The forged notary seal, the non-existent witnesses, the handwriting analysis, and Victor's prior fraud record made the outcome almost a formality by the time we walked into the courtroom. The judge voided the second will entirely and reinstated the original one, the will Dad had actually signed 2 years earlier, splitting the diner and the estate between Denise and me equally, the way he'd always told us he wanted it. Victor was later charged with forgery and elder fraud in our state too, on top of the pending cases against him elsewhere. I think about Victor sometimes, more than I expected to. He's still facing charges, still fighting them, still, as far as I know, alone. I don't excuse what he did. I can't. But I understand, now, What it does to a person to spend a lifetime on the outside of a family, looking in through a window he was never invited through. I don't know if I'll ever meet him properly, not as a fraud case, but as a brother. Part of me still wonders what would have happened if he'd just knocked on the door instead. What I know for certain is this: the inheritance was never really the point. The diner, the house, the money, none of it meant anything compared to almost losing my sister to a secret neither of us chose to carry alone. We put a small brass plaque by the register last month. Just Dad's name, the year he opened the place, and the line he used to say every single morning before unlocking the door, the one Denise and I used to roll our eyes at as kids. A diner without the owner's hands in the flour isn't really a diner at all. Underneath it, in smaller letters, 2 more words. You have to lean in to read them. Both of ours. Every morning we flip the sign to open, I think about how close we came to losing each other over a piece of paper that was never even real. And every morning, I'm grateful we didn't.